So, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the US's new health secretary of all people, just dropped a bombshell. He promised that by September 2025, we'll know what's caused the autism epidemic and even eliminate those exposures. Yeah, in barely 5 months, less than that now, the US government is supposedly going to crack the case on autism's cause, the same case that scientists have studied for decades already. Spoiler alert, autism is not caused by vaccines, and I've already made a video debunking that claim. Autism also runs in families. Autism is highly heritable, and no, we don't need curing, but I will get to this later in the video. Kennedy boasted at a cabinet meeting that a massive testing and research effort with hundreds of scientists from around the world is on it. And Trump speculated that the answer is you stop taking something, or maybe it's a shot. Real subtle. Hey Pip. Beautiful. Sorry, what? September? Really? Is there a plan to speed run breaking the conclusions of hundreds of scientific studies, the entire scientific consensus? It's as if they think that autism is a murder mystery that they can solve with some Scooby-Doo big reveal, but it's not that simple. And calling it an autism epidemic, as RFK Jr. repeatedly does, is hugely misleading. The Autism Society of America immediately pointed out that calling rising autism diagnoses an epidemic is incredibly irresponsible and deeply concerning because it encourages fear, paranoia, and stigmatizes autistic people. We are not a disease or some sort of outbreak. We're your family, your friends, your neighbours. We've always been here, but with increased awareness and some changes to the diagnostic criteria, we're now being counted instead of being ignored. Let's unpack the autism epidemic idea for the new people at the back, and I'll be quick, I promise. Yeah, reported autism rates have risen over the years. In 2000, the CDC estimated that around 1 in 150 kids were autistic. By 2020, it was about 1 in 36. On the surface, that looks dramatic, but virtually all experts agree that most of this increase is due to an expanded definition of autism and better awareness, meaning more people, especially those who have been overlooked in the past, like women and girls, are getting correctly identified now. There's a whole generation of people who simply had no early identification because such a thing didn't exist when they were kids. In other words, autistic people weren't rare before, we just weren't always recognised. By lumping all of this under the scary word epidemic, RFK Jr. is implying that there's some new toxin or some new factor has suddenly caused autism rates to skyrocket. The scientific consensus says otherwise. Broader diagnostic criteria, early screening and a lot less stigma, meaning people are more increasingly asking for adult autism assessments. It means more autistic people show up in the stats now, and it's not something new that's creating autism out of thin air. And if I can rant a little about the cause, RFK Jr. seems fixated on finding some sort of singular boogeyman. To hear him talk, especially as a Brit, it's really strange. You think we'd find some sort of chemical in the water or vaccine ingredient, and boom, autism solved. But it doesn't work like that. Decades of research indicate that autism is a complex neurodevelopmental condition, meaning that you always have it, but with many contributing factors, particularly genetics. In fact, large studies of twins have estimated that autism's heritability is in the order of about 80 to 90%. That means autism is largely, naturally occurring, and it's a variation of how our brains develop. There's no one toxin or weird new habit that's caused an autism surge, because there is no autism surge in the way that they're imagining. But RFK Jr. has a history of blaming vaccines and environmental chemicals for just about everything. Trump too has long hinted that he thinks something in the kids' environment maybe it's a shot. Yeah, subtle. Maybe something like that is to blame, and they're just primed to go witch hunting. Autistic people aren't asking for a cure. We're asking for research and resources, financial and otherwise, assistance to live better, healthier, happier lives. The very idea of curing autism is offensive to a whole lot of us. There's a whole neurodiversity movement out there that says that neurological differences, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, you name it, are a normal part of human diversity, not a disease to wipe out. As the ASAN group put it, we shouldn't try to cure or get rid of autism. Autistic people should be allowed to exist. And we should make sure everyone gets the accommodations that we need to reach our full potential. In general, the autistic community has fought for years to shift the narrative from autism is a tragedy that's in your house and coming to get you in a Slender Man type of thing, to a different way of being. We don't want to be fixed, we want to be understood, supported and accepted. Autism shapes the way that we perceive the world, how we communicate, how we think and even move. It's deeply entwined with our identity. Curing us would mean fundamentally changing who we are. Many of us feel that attempting to remove our autism would be like erasing us entirely. It's no coincidence that some autistic people say that a cure for autism would be sort of tantamount to death. Heavy, I guess, but it gets the point across. It's part of someone's brain wiring. Even if it were possible to somehow make an autistic person non-autistic, and it's not, short of sci-fi brain rewiring, you would end up with a very different person. So when RFK Jr. talks about eliminating exposures to prevent autism, a lot of us hear an uncomfortable echo of the old Eugenics mindset, like he wants fewer autistic people to exist in the world. No thanks. Instead of trying to eliminate autism, how about eliminating the barriers that make life hard for autistic people? The neurodiversity perspective says that the problem isn't that autistic people exist. The problem is that society isn't built to include us. There's a saying in the community, nothing about us without us. If you actually involve autistic people in discussions about autism, radical idea, I know, the conversation shifts real quick from eradication to accommodation. Do you remember a video I made about a year ago called Neurotypical Spectrum Disorder? The idea was to flip the script on the autistic diagnostic criteria, which is needlessly pathological. Sometimes it is just a matter of perspective, an insistence on firm handshakes and eye contact, obsession with small talk, irrational fear of honesty, the endless hierarchies everywhere. I could easily write a medical manual and describe the NT disorder with these symptoms. It's somewhat unfortunate that the DSM's full title is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, because autism is in it and it isn't a mental disorder. Autism isn't a mental illness. It's almost as though the American Psychiatric Association had a few blank pages or had to make up a word count in an essay somewhere. Why is stimming such a bad thing? Or the way that autistic people like to spend their time? Why are neurotypicals so uninformed about trains or dinosaurs? Why do they like phone calls so much? Clinically, autism is a disorder and it can be disabling. Framing it as a pathology is so one-sided. Most of the issues that come about for autistic people are generally caused by a mismatch between the person and their environment. Maybe it's society that needs fixing, not autistic people. Okay, I want to talk about the science briefly. Back to the serious stuff, because I remember what I wanted to talk about now. Kennedy's pledge to find a cause of autism by September isn't just tone deaf, but it's scientifically laughable. He's acting like no one's bothered to investigate autism's causes until he came along with a 5-month deadline and a posse of hand-picked researchers. In reality, scientists from around the globe have been working on this for decades. It's really complicated. There's no single blood test or brain scan for autism, and there is likely no single cause either. We know genetics plays a really big role. Hundreds of genes have been linked to autistic traits. Each contributes a little bit of autism. I'm joking, right? But it is true, hundreds of genes have been linked to autistic traits. But we also know that there are some prenatal factors like having older parents or a very premature birth. Or Simon Baron-Cohen's testosterone exposure in the womb sort of suggestions, ideas. For the vast majority of autistic people, pinning autism on one specific factor is impossible. It's an interplay of biology, mostly biology, and environment that we just haven't fully mapped yet. RFK Jr. has a long history of focusing almost exclusively on vaccines and environmental, chemicals. He's been a leading voice in the baseless anti-vaccine movement, loudly insisting for years that vaccines cause autism. More on this in a bit. So I have a strong hunch that his massive research effort is really about just proving his own pet theory. In fact, news reports say HHS under Kennedy is directing the CDC and NIH to launch large studies on vaccines and autism again, despite this question being asked and answered ad nauseum. It doesn't take Nostradamus to predict that come September, if Kennedy is still sticking to his script, he'll have claimed to have found something. Maybe it was the vaccines all along, or perhaps some new villain, like some pollutant, regardless of what the evidence actually says. Do you remember Andrew Wakefield's fraudulent 98 paper that effectively started all this nonsense? That took 12 years to be properly, fully retracted. Good science doesn't work on political timetables. By the mid-2000s, dozens of studies had now shown the link between vaccines and autism. One of the largest was a 2002 Danish study that looked at over 500,000 children and found zero difference in autism rates between unvaccinated and vaccinated kids. The same Danish research team even went further and followed over 500,000 children who received an autism diagnosis over a long period of time. That's nearly every Danish child in the cohort, not that has autism. And they found that the MMR vaccine did not increase the risk of autism, not in any of the high-risk subgroups, and not timing-related. Rigorous research often takes years, big sample sizes, careful methodologies, peer review. This isn't just stuff that you can fast-track in a few months because a politician demands it. The Danish study that I just mentioned, well, that spanned about 14 years. There needs to be time to gather the data, to analyse it carefully, publish it, have other scientists verify it. By contrast, RFK Jr. acting like he can unveil the hidden truth by September is either naive or really disingenuous, or dangerous. It feels to me like a setup for a predetermined conclusion. He might as well have said, "I'll prove my long-held belief right by September." Because let's be honest, the likely outcome is a press conference in September where they announce, ta-da! The cause turned out to be something Kennedy has been blaming all along, probably with flimsy evidence that real experts will pick apart immediately. For what it's worth. Speaking of press conferences, Trump already said that there would be no bigger news than finding the cause of autism. Of course, he'd love that, wouldn't he? It would make his administration look like saviours. How did we end up with RFK Jr.? 2 words: President Trump. After losing re-election in 2020, Trump stormed back in 2024 and returned to the White House and wasted no time in settling old scores and advancing his pet causes. Apparently, his long-held vaccine skepticism. I made a video about this earlier, which is in the description below, and it is worth a watch, mostly because I've taken the time to craft the content and it's edited better than this video will be. I'm very short on time at the moment for many reasons, and this is the only way I could get a video out this Sunday. Trump putting RFK Jr. back in charge of health is like putting an arsonist back in charge of a fire station. Plenty of people noticed this, and more than 80 medical and advocacy organisations urged the US Senate to reject Kennedy's nomination. One-sided lies and disinformation at an unprecedented scale, and that it would unwind a century of progress. I do have references below, but I can't remember which of the 80 or so letters to the US Senate these particular really erudite lines came from. There have been waves of firings, a mandate to pause all external communications because, transparency. And the CDC stopped its weekly bulletins. Then came an executive order to withdraw the US from the World Health Organization. So now The US isn't participating in any global health community efforts. I'm going to guess this is to give RFK Jr. and his friends free rein to do things their way without any pesky scientists or experts in the mix. Since my last video on this subject, America is in its own little world now. It's somewhat ironic that the HHS, which is the umbrella over the CDC and the NIH and FDA, has already funded plenty of autism research over the years. They've looked at genetics, environmental factors, early interventions, services, you name it. There's an entire interagency committee dedicated to coordinating the efforts. RFK Jr. parachutes into this and implies that they've all failed and he's going to sort it all out swiftly. What's more likely? That they're all wrong? Or that the person who's expressed interests in quack autism treatments or putting people on antidepressants into labour camps, or that HIV doesn't cause AIDS, that guy's right and everyone else is wrong? Desperately need a drink. My throat is parched. I'm going to go and get a brew. The motorcycles are arriving. Anyway, we can't talk about RFK Jr.'s motivations without first talking about Children's Health Defence, the organisation that he founded, the ironically named organisation that he founded. It was originally called the World Mercury Project. Despite its innocent sounding name, CHD is essentially an anti-vaccine. Do you know what? It actually smells of this beautiful aroma of wild garlic here. Let me show you. Just huge beds of this beautiful wild garlic. Very nice. So on to World Garlic Day, sorry. World Mercury Project. Despite its innocent sounding name, ironic sounding name, CHD is essentially an anti-vaccine, anti-public health propaganda machine. It pumps out daily content sowing fear about vaccines, 5G, chemicals. Everything is chemicals. You name it. An NPR analysis described CHD as a prolific source of false and misleading claims about vaccines, including the long debunked false claim that vaccines cause autism. They're one of the main organisations keeping this myth alive. During the COVID-19 pandemic, CHD's revenues soared. They received multi-million dollars a year. I think like $20 million in donations in 1 year. And they churned out conspiracy videos and filed plenty of lawsuits against everything, from vaccine mandates to suing the FDA and the CDC and other organisations that RFK Jr. now oversees. Talk about a conflict of interest. One of their strategies is suing to get access to data or to overturn public health rules to prove that the government is hiding something. It's in CHD's interest to perpetuate this notion of an autism conspiracy because it keeps their followers engaged and donating. Where can I go? I'll go up. Now, as HHS Secretary, Kennedy has an unprecedented platform to legitimise his narrative. He can allocate government resources to studies that serve his agenda, like rehashing the vaccine question yet again. He can potentially cherry-pick scientists who already lean towards his views. Maybe a few fringe researchers who believe that mercury in vaccines is the culprit. Never mind that thimerosal, the mercury-containing preservative, was removed from most vaccines over 20 years ago, and autism diagnostic rates still went up. And come September, if he declares mission accomplished, just imagine how much money he's going to make from that. The financial bonanza and political capital that that would generate. What I'm saying is, RFK Jr.'s bold claim isn't happening in a vacuum. It's the culmination of years of positioning. He's always wanted the credibility of government backing for his fringe theories, and now he has the title and the power to attempt it. Meanwhile, the rest of us autistics are nervously watching, knowing that whatever cause he proclaims, it likely won't affect reality, but it will be used to push policies or products. Maybe they'll target certain vaccines or certain foods or push detox regimes for kids. His followers already do some really weird shit with kids. Restrictive diets, bizarre therapies, detoxing, and there's a huge cottage industry selling supplements to the parents of autistic children. Those poor kids. I'm really worried that if this task force points to something like vaccines, it will only reinvigorate the harassment and guilt-tripping of parents who followed standard medical advice. And frankly, the biggest reason more autistic people are visible today than ever before is that the autistic community fought to be seen. They fought for better diagnostics, for recognition of being an autistic adult. Let that sink in. Autism doesn't get taken away on your 18th birthday by the autism fairy for girls and people of colour to get assessed and potentially diagnosed. I want the numbers to go up, let's be clear. In the sense of identifying people that have been overlooked. That's not an epidemic, that's progress. Why do so many people, especially certain parents and figures like RFK Jr., remain obsessed with curing or preventing autism, other than because they're selling fear and making a large fortune doing so? If you've never seen Autism Speaks' commercial, I Am Autism, if you haven't seen it, consider yourself lucky. It's the one with the deep, menacing voice, speaking as though it were autism itself, and it literally threatens families. It claims to break marriages, and it says I work faster than paediatric AIDS, cancer and diabetes combined. I mean, holy hell, right? Imagine you're a parent who's just received an autism diagnosis for your child around that time. You go online and you see that video. You'd be terrified out of your mind. You'd think, oh my God, I have to do everything I can to fight this thing. My son was 2 years old at the time of that advert. I can only imagine how parents must have felt, thanks to Autism Speaks. That's where a lot of the emotional drive for a cure comes from. This sense that autism is a kidnapper and it stole your normal child and left behind an empty shell of a human. That's a real metaphor, by the way, I'm not making it up. It's an extreme and false picture. Autistic kids are very much right there, even if they behave or communicate differently. But it still took root in the popular imagination, just like Wakefield's fraudulent paper, and for similar reasons. Wakefield sought to manufacture evidence to be used against vaccine manufacturers and enrich himself through legal cases, and those pushing the cure narrative today often have similar financial motives, selling books or supplements or alternative therapies. This weaponization of fear around autism has created a lucrative industry rather than the actual science or helping autistic people. And before people here start making comments about my appearance or my functioning, let me be clear. For a long time, autism was depicted only as a most disabling form. Media showed mostly children who were non-speaking and showed them having meltdowns, needing constant care. And there's nothing wrong with being a high support needs autistic person. High support needs autistic people deserve equal respect. But my point is that the media rarely shows happy autistic lives. Support needs irrelevant. Let that sink in. We only see suffering. The narrative is tragedy, hardship, that the one-sided view made many parents panic at their child being autistic. These people exist online even now. A little browse on TikTok and you'll see mothers of autistic children expressing these same fears and worries. The emotional soil has been very fertile for anyone promising a cure for the last few decades. We should acknowledge the many parents of autistic kids who genuinely love their children but hate to see them struggle. They think, if I could cure my child's autism, would that take away their suffering, their anxiety, their sensory overload, difficulties with communication? I think it comes from a place of compassion, albeit misguided. The hard truth is that you cannot separate autism from the person. You can treat medical issues, you can teach skills, you can provide tools. All of these things greatly improve an autistic person's life, but you can't just pluck the autism out without also plucking out something else that's essential in that person. Coming to accept that is a journey that many parents still have to go through. Very sadly, some still get stuck in the denial, fix-it stage indefinitely. And that's a vulnerability that people like RFK Jr. and his organisations exploit, like a hacker looking for an opportunity. They offer the parents an external enemy to fight and dangle the prospect of a world where no one is autistic, some sort of idealism. It would be wonderful if no one was autistic in a way, that kind of thing. It's essentially selling a fantasy, a return to normalcy. But think about what that means to autistic people hearing this. If you say you want to end autism, we hear that you want to end people like us. It's hard not to take that personally. It tells us our lives are seen as less valuable, that our neurotype is a mistake. That's one reason you see so much pushback from autistic self-advocates against the cure narrative. It's not that we don't want to alleviate the challenges autistic people face, we absolutely do. We just believe in doing it partly, mostly perhaps, by changing society and supports, not by eliminating autistic neurology. I have to add, when RFK Jr. and Trump throw around stats like the 1 in 31 kids, Kennedy's data now shows 1 in 31, up from 1 in 36. And then they call it a crisis. There's an implicit assumption that autism is something awful. But is it? Sure, autism can be disabling. It can be hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. As an autistic adult, I've had my share of struggles with sensory overload, burnout, social misunderstandings and more. But I also value the way that my brain works. I wouldn't trade it. There are joys in autism too, intense passions, unique perspectives, the genuine delight in things that others overlook or cannot enjoy to a similar intensity because their neurotypical brains seemingly aren't able to. Increasingly, society is recognising that neurodiversity brings strengths. Autistic people contribute to science, art, tech, any field you can name. It's got autistic people in it, perhaps even leading it. And that's why hearing powerful officials talk about us like a disease is chilling, it's dehumanising. Historically, whenever a group of people have been depicted as a malady to be eradicated, bad things follow. And I don't think that RFK Jr. wants genocide or anything, don't get me wrong, but the language is very dangerous. The neurodiversity movement arose precisely to counter that dehumanisation and assert that autistic lives have value, just as they are. So, where do we go from here? We have the head of the HHS on a quixotic, and I have waited a long time to use that word, a quixotic mission to find the cause of autism by a deadline. I'm not optimistic that this will yield anything scientifically valid. The best case scenario, in my view, is that the whole thing quietly fizzles out when they realise that you can't rush science. And maybe they publish some mundane report like, we need more research. The worst case scenario, I think, is finding some misleading finding that blames some scapegoat. Igniting a new wave of misinformation and panic, just like Autism Speaks did, just like Andrew Wakefield's original paper did. Kennedy and Trump would then trumpet that as a result, a big vindication of their views, don't you think? Well, the scientific community face palms in unison. But look, regardless of what stunt that they pull in September, autistic people will still be here on October the 1st and will still be autistic, and that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay, it's something to be celebrated. The real issues here is that people do need urgent action. We do need urgent action, helping people to access quality education, jobs, healthcare, housing, addressing the needs of non-speaking autistics to get communication support, tackling the often absurdly long wait lists for autism assessments and services, supporting autistic adults as they age, combating the stigma that leads to things like high rates of unaliving rates in autistic people. None of those problems are solved by hunting for a simplistic cause. We could find the cure tomorrow, and hypothetically it wouldn't magically improve the life of a single autistic person alive today. What would improve lives is acceptance and the aforementioned resources. I know it can feel less flashy to talk about accommodations and support than to talk about cures and causes. Cause of autism found. Makes headlines. Local employer creates sensory-friendly workplace. Does not. But one is a fantasy and the other can happen now in forward-thinking places. The neurodiversity mindset is slowly but surely making waves. You see more autistic adults speaking out. Hi. More inclusive portrayals in media, more research on how to help autistics thrive as autistic people rather than trying to force us to act neurotypical. This is progress to be hopeful about. And to all the autistic and otherwise neurodivergent folks watching, you are not broken and you don't need fixing. Don't let anyone, no matter how big their microphone, make you feel like you're a mistake that slipped through the cracks of some public health campaign. We've always been here. Part of the, tapestry of humanity. Autism acceptance doesn't mean ignoring the challenges, it means embracing the whole person, the challenges and strengths, and working with them. If you're autistic, that's a fact. A fact that comes with difficulties, certainly, but it also comes with unique strengths, perspectives, and ways of experiencing the world. They are increasingly on the fringe of public opinion. Most Americans do trust vaccines. Most do not think that autism is an epidemic in the way that he describes. The scientific community, disability rights organisations and autistic advocates are pushing back hard. And we saw this when Kennedy's nomination was opposed by so many people. And we'll see it again if he tries to peddle junk findings. And more importantly, our community is pretty strong. Neurodivergent people are connecting, organising and making our voices heard more than ever before. For every fear video, there are countless autistic adults showing the world who we really are. We're not invisible anymore, and that ultimately is why I'm optimistic, because when you actually know autistic people, co-workers, family, friends, the wild myths don't survive. It's been that way for every classification of person. However you want to slice humanity up, the other, the fear of the other has always fallen away when you have someone as a friend, co-worker, a family member, someone close to you from that group. If September 2025 rolls around and RFK Jr. holds that big press conference with some grand revelation, I promise that I'll be back here to break down whatever nonsense it is. But until then, I'm going to focus on making YouTube videos for my lovely community. I'm working on my biggest piece of content yet. And that's why this particular video is like this. And it's not put together the way that I would like. If that's okay with you all, do stay subscribed for it. I promise to make it worth your while. And in the meantime, if you'd like to support my work on Patreon, it is linked in the description below. There are 3 tiers, and the lowest kitten tier gives you your name in the credits of each of my videos, access to the 24/7 Scratching Post Discord community, private live streams, all for just $4 a month. The higher cat and tiger tiers will be getting some extra videos, 2 more going up very soon on Autism Acceptance Month and a behind the scenes preview. But the best way to support me on YouTube is by dropping your favourite emoji in the comments to let me know you made it this far, and liking the video, and thank you for all of your kind support. Neurodivergent folks, stay awesome. There's one thing that I don't need to wait until September to know for sure. Bye for now. Hydra, what do you have to say?